The Israeli Krav Maga instructor looked at the small Filipino man and laughed. You? You want to spar with me? Sergeant David Cohen had trained commandos in 3 different countries. He'd been teaching hand-to-hand combat for 15 years. He was 6'2", 220 pounds of muscle and attitude. The Filipino standing in front of him was maybe 5'6", 150 pounds soaking wet, quiet, unassuming. Sir, if you're willing, the Filipino said politely. David smirked and turned to the class of Special Forces trainees. Watch closely. This is what happens when traditional martial arts meet real combat. He had no idea he was about to be humiliated in front of 50 elite soldiers in less than 8 seconds. This happened in 2018 at a joint military training exercise in Fort Magsaysay, Philippines. Special forces from 6 countries had gathered: Israeli commandos, U.S. Navy SEALs, Australian SAS, South Korean Special Forces, Japanese Self-Defense Forces, and the Philippine Scout Rangers. The Israelis had a reputation. Their Krav Maga system was considered one of the deadliest combat styles in the world. Practical, brutal, no nonsense. David Cohen was their demonstration instructor. He'd been flown in specifically to teach modern close-quarters combat to what he called jungle fighters who still use outdated techniques. On day 3, he was demonstrating knife defense, showing the proper way to disarm an attacker. That's when Staff Sergeant Rico Mendoza raised his hand. Rico was Filipino Scout Ranger, soft-spoken, always respectful, the kind of guy who smiled when he talked and called everyone sir, regardless of rank. David had barely noticed him in the 3 days of training. That was his first mistake. Yes, Sergeant, David said impatiently. Sir, with respect, that technique won't work against a Filipino knife fighter. The room went quiet. David's smile disappeared. Excuse me? The way you're holding the training knife, sir, the angle of attack, a Filipino fighter wouldn't come at you like that. Rico's voice was still polite, but firm. David's face reddened. In front of American SEALs, in front of his own Israeli commandos. This small Filipino soldier was questioning his expertise? Really? David's voice dripped with condescension. And what makes you an expert? I've been training in Filipino martial arts since I was 6 years old, sir. Kali, Eskrima. My lolo, my grandfather, was a guerrilla fighter in World War II. He killed Japanese soldiers with a bolo knife. David laughed, actually laughed out loud. So your grandfather waved sticks around, and you think that qualifies you to critique modern combat techniques? He looked around at the other soldiers, expecting them to join his mockery. They didn't. The American SEALs were watching carefully. They'd trained with Filipinos before. They knew better. Tell you what, David said, walking to the center of the mat. Why don't you show us these magical Filipino techniques? Come on, let's spar. No rules. First person to land 3 solid strikes wins. Rico hesitated. Sir, I don't think... What's wrong? Scared? David was in full alpha mode now. Chest out, hands on hips. All talk, no action. Typical. Rico slowly stood up. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. David immediately went into his Krav Maga stance, aggressive, forward-weighted, ready to explode. Rico just stood naturally, hands loose at his sides, weight balanced. He looked almost casual. Begin! The exercise coordinator shouted. David lunged forward with a straight punch, fast and powerful. What happened next, most people didn't even see. Rico's hand moved, not blocking but redirecting. David's punch slid past his head by millimeters. In the same motion, Rico's other hand struck David's elbow. A small strike. Precise. David's arm went numb instantly. Before he could react, Rico had already moved to the side. His foot swept David's lead leg. Not hard, just perfectly timed. David stumbled, his training kicked in, and he tried to recover, throwing a wild elbow. Rico ducked under it, stepped inside David's guard, and struck 3 times in rapid succession. Palm strike to the solar plexus, knee to the thigh, elbow to the shoulder. Tap, 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 3 clean hits, 3 points. David was still trying to process what happened when the coordinator yelled, "Stop!" Elapsed time 8.3 seconds. The room exploded. Soldiers were on their feet. The American SEALs were cheering. Even the Australian SAS guys, usually stoic, were grinning and clapping. David stood there, breathing hard, his face a mixture of shock and humiliation. Rico immediately bowed respectfully. "Good match, sir. You're very strong." One of the Israeli commandos started laughing, not mocking David, but amazed. "Sababa, that was incredible." The coordinator, a Philippine Army colonel, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, what you just witnessed is the difference between sport combat and survival combat. Sergeant Mendoza just demonstrated Cali, the fighting system Filipinos have refined over 500 years of constant warfare." He looked at David, whose face was still red. "Captain Cohen, you're an excellent instructor. Your techniques work in most situations. But you made a fundamental error. You assumed your way was the only way." The colonel gestured to Rico. "Sergeant, please explain." Rico looked uncomfortable being the center of attention, but he stepped forward. "Sir, Krav Maga is designed for quick neutralization. It's excellent, but it's also relatively new, developed in the 1930s. Filipino martial arts are ancient. We've been fighting with blades and sticks since before Europeans arrived in our islands." He picked up 2 training sticks. "In Kali, we don't just learn techniques, we learn principles. Flow, adaptability. We train with weapons first, then empty hands, because if you can fight with a 12-inch stick at full speed, fighting with your hands becomes easy." He demonstrated the sticks blurring through the air in patterns that were beautiful and terrifying. "Most importantly, we learned destructions, attacking the weapon and the limb at the same time. That's why Captain Cohen's arm went numb. I hit the nerve cluster in his elbow while deflecting his punch." David was listening now. Really listening. The mockery had been replaced by genuine interest. Can you teach us?" he asked quietly. Rico smiled. "Of course, sir. That's why we're all here, right? To learn from each other." The story became legend in special forces communities worldwide, not because of the knockout or the technique, but because of what happened after. 2 warriors from different worlds, 1 moment of conflict, and the wisdom to turn ego into education. David Cohen learned this in 8 seconds. The hard way, but he learned. Never mistake kindness for weakness, never mistake silence for inability, and never ever underestimate a Filipino who smiles and calls you sir. Subscribe for more untold stories of Filipino excellence.